My name is James PFP. You can call me James if you like. This is the Banjocast, pitchforks and flaming torches. It's telling me that the health is good. I'll believe this when I friggin' see it. I will believe it when I see it. Welcome back. If this happens to be the first time you're joining me, nice to meet you. What am I here to do this evening? Well, I'm going to respond when I get, well, I'll get to this when I get to it, but I'm going to be responding to a comment that I got earlier today. It's probably going to take a while to go through the response. And I'm going to read the entire comment too, and it's a thoughtful, well-written, anticipatory comment, but I do have some answers for it. But before I do, let me have a look here at the whiteboard. Before I do, I've got a few items which are not up for bid. A few items which are outstanding in terms of things that I've how do I put it? In terms of things that I've been listening to or paying attention to. I'm turning the camera off for a second here. Couple of items outstanding. The first comes from Taylor Lorenz. I'll keep the camera on in this one, and I'll turn over this way and turn the camera off here instead. First comes from Taylor Lorenz. Here's Taylor Lorenz's Twitter. Taylor Lorenz posted 4 hours ago, no! And then like a not smiley face, and then it says all ends. When you follow the link, here is the all.com. 2018 January, all ends. It was published today. It is with a mixture of disappointment and relief that we're announcing the cessation of editorial operations at the all at the end of this month. For nearly a decade, we followed a dream of building a better internet, though we did not manage to do that every day, and we tried very hard, and we hope you don't blame us for how things ultimately turned out. We're intensely proud of what we managed to accomplish over the years, and while most of the credit goes to an astoundingly talented team of writers and editors, the greatest achievement any site can claim is in the quality and fervor of its audience, and on that score we feel we were the most successful organization ever. Curiously worded. The All was a website about news, ideas, obscure internet minutiae of the day. I guess it still is there, it simply won't be updated. Based in New York City, its motto used to be less stupid. Well, again, I guess its motto still is, be less stupid. And it recently announced that it would be ending publications. But I guess it'll stay up for a while before. Maybe someone will archive the entirety. Or figure out a way of making good on the archive. Founded 2009 by the people mentioned there. 4 sister sites. I wonder what's happening to them. No idea. That's courtesy of Taylor Lorenz. But that's not where this ends. Courtesy of Taylor Lorenz, but there's also this. This one comes from Faith Goldie. Marathi TV, I archived this yesterday. This has been archived in the past. Faith Goldie, age, married, bio, wiki, biodata, profile, Wikipedia information, introduction. Journalist and devout Catholic with family and education and stuff. Worked for Rebel Media. She's not dating, and she doesn't believe in sex before marriage. She looks up to her parents. I don't know when this was last updated. Anyway, I don't know anything about what is happening with Faith Goldie. All I know for sure is if you went looking at Faith Goldie's Twitter, you might well be led to suspect that she or someone has recently cleaned everything ever from it. Live streams, the works. All posts, everything. So something went down for Faith, and I'm not going to say any more than that. Like, whatever is her business is now her business, and she's decided to take it private. So I have no reason or animus against her to continue to pick on her if she's removed herself from the public sphere. As much as I might have been intrigued or even maybe even excited by the prospect once upon a time, it wasn't worth going after in any kind of long-term fashion. And it appears she's got other things to worry about. And like I say, all the best to Faith Goldie. Here's the next one. Penrose Tiling Explained. Spent some time last night going over some reasons for liking the number 5. And here is... Oh, you know what I haven't done yet? I haven't been looking at my chat. I'm like, why is the window so bloody empty in the top corner? Oh, here it is. Chat is open. Penrose Tiling. I'll copy this link and post it to the chat for now. But all these links will go into the description later. Or a comment underneath the video. Last week I posted some obfuscated Python which generates Penrose tiling. Today I'll explain the basic algorithm behind that Python script and share the non-obfuscated version. Algorithm manipulates the list of red, or a list of red and blue isosceles triangles. Each red triangle has a 36-degree angle at the apex, while each blue has a 108-degree. This is a very nice arrangement. 72 plus 36. Or 72 minus 36, in other words. In Python, we can represent such triangles in tuples, as tuples of the form in brackets, a color, comma, a, b, and c coordinate. For the first element, color value of 0 indicates red, while 1 indicates blue. The rest of the tuple gives a coordinate of a in A, B, C vertices, expressed as complex numbers. Meaning to say, in much the same way as I identified yesterday, thinking in 5 dimensions, you can add an imaginary dimension as part of this construction. So you have a 4-dimensional construct, which has 3 dimensions of real space and exists in time, but also has some other complex information attached to it. Complex numbers work well here since they can represent any point in 2D plane. The real component gives an x coordinate, while the imaginary component gives a y coordinate. So as you can see, we'll draw the outline along the sides of the triangle, but not along the base. So here's the 36 degree, here's the 108 degree. This allows each triangle to connect with another triangle of the same color, forming a rhombus-shaped tiles that are visible in the final Penrose. So this is one of the main constructions of the Penrose tiles. They pop out actually quite a bit because they're the filler points. Now here is the fun part. Given a list of such triangles, we can subdivide each one and generate another triangle. The red triangle is subdivided into 2 smaller triangles as follows. Here's a red one with the 36 apex. We create a division point at some known ratio from here to here, or I mean to say there'll be a measurement which this side of the triangle matches that side of the other triangle. And together they form that side of a red triangle. The above subdivision introduces a new vertex P, located at a point along the state edge AB, which satisfies the golden ratio, my friends, 1 plus the root of 5 over 2. When I saw that again today, I laughed and laughed and laughed. Of course, the golden ratio uses 5. Why wouldn't it? I'll read this out. I shouldn't have to read it out. I was here looking at it. I'm going to read something else later. I'll use the accessories and the calculator here instead. Golden ratio. 1 plus the root of 5. We'll do the root of 5 first. Not that it matters. Root 5 equals this number plus 1 equals this number, all of it divided by 2. Oh, I hit the I number there. I want divide by. Gives us the golden ratio, 1.618. Yeah. So I'll draw your attention to the fact the golden ratio doesn't need the number 3 in its calculation. It uses 5 instead and divides by 2. It makes it kind of like pi in a way. Anyway, similarly, each blue triangle is subdivided into 3 smaller triangles. 2 of the blue type and 1 of the red, using the same ratio along that edge. Each subdivision introduces new vertex Q along the edge BA and R along the edge BC. That's true for both of these Q and R points in terms of the ratio of the length from one side to the other of R. As well, 2 of the resulting triangles are mirrored. I've drawn the highlight in the corner of each triangle to identify which ones are mirrored and which ones aren't. Oh, that's pretty cool. All the above steps are performed using just a few lines of Python. Function accepts a list. Triangles represented as tuples. Divides whatever your shape is up by using that, so it is a fractal pattern. And look what happens when you subdivide it at greater and greater depth. Modified output, the darts and kites tiling instead. Oh yeah, you can, the way that you put together your the way you put together the code here will also determine the way that they'll start assembling, and you can, there's multiple solutions for that as well. Which ones will subdivide next is another way of looking at it. Or when do you want to form specific subsets to get a flower or petal form out of it. I found this post so inspiring, I sat down and implemented the algorithm in Objective-C as an iOS phone app. Sorry. Beautiful. Gracious. Where was I? So that's Faith Goldie, that's Taylor Lorenz, that's the Penrose. Here comes the next thing. There will be a link in the description to this, but in reply to a comment which is upon one of my own YouTube videos, I won't post a link in the chat right now. I remember the particular evening myself and Nun had this discussion. So he's maintaining a line which we had during the stream. I'm going to read this verbatim. Marriage is not merely a private relationship. Not merely. Okay, hang on. Marital status is a public status. I agree. Hence the public debate about, okay, marital status is a public status. Depending on what your version of public is, yes, but where is this publis you speak of? From where do we derive it? Is it from civil authority or from specific religious authority? Hence the public debate about extending what status to other than the union of husband and wife. There's only a debate depending on your jurisdiction, inside of religious cultures. On this we agree. The debate exists inside of the culture where there is a resistance to what is available on the outside the culture. What the extension is for is to allow two people, one way or the other, to celebrate their particular custom, the custom of the religious culture. And instead of focusing on the necessity, the absolute necessity of gender, or sex, and sex being exactly, if they're same or different, this is the issue that they're raising. Union of husband and wife. One of the most basic functions of marital status is distinguishing between marriage as a kind of relationship from non-marriage, a wide spectrum and different kinds of relationship that populate society. I think this is why during the stream I spent lots of time, and I've been reading ever since, Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. Sooner or later I'll either finish the book, because it won't take very long, it'll only be 24 days and I'll be there, or someone else will start reading it. But that's what Vonnegut says. There is a difference between a kairos, in which you're in relationship with some society around you in whatever way, but then there's a specific kind of kairos in which two people, and two people alone it seems, are so very closely tied to one another that it seems as if one of them were to pass away, the other would die within a week. And strangely enough, to put a hammer on the nail which is in the table already, put a hammer onto the end of that nail and drive it down a little. If one of in his Duprass model, what he said, like I just said, I'm going to repeat it. If one of them should die, the other would probably, and really in a true Duprass, would die within a week, kind of a thing. The dependence upon one another is so very great. What's funny when I read that is, what I really know is, it seems to me, bang, 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 that if the female dies first, that will probably happen to the male. It won't be a week, it'll be a year. It'll be inside of a year. But if the man should die first, that's different. That'll turn out differently. That won't be inside of a week. Oh, there'll be devotion. There'll be a change perhaps in the lifestyle. But there's no way that Duprass model actually holds up to reality. No way. I like the model. I like the way that it idealizes the understanding of the relationship, but do they need to be of opposite sex? Well, we'll get to that. The sexual aspect is essential to the union of husband and wife as a kind of relationship. What do you mean by that? The sexual copulation part or the procreative part? Because the sexual doesn't begin and end with children. This is expressed publicly in laws and in rituals and in customs. This we agree on. This is called cultural display. I think that's what I would have called it, and that's also why they're like taboos, which are prevented from being displayed publicly or whatever within the context of the community, the fellowship. Yet it is more substantive than you implied. I think you would agree. No, more substantive how? Only insofar as there is some kind of common space that is cultural. Only insofar as that's true. And if there is if most of the time when we're talking about these Duprasses, as Vonnegut terms them, the Duprass has a private boundary around it. To fuck with one is to fuck with both. And that's the private boundary. The individual has been lost to the amorphous mass of both. To contend with one is to contend with both. You have no choice. You're always at a disadvantage at an individual level due to numbers. Because what is the husband ever going to say if you have a dispute with the wife or vice versa? There's no way to win on an equality footing as an individual unless you think of that unit as an individual. Doesn't mean ignoring half of it all the time, or whatever fraction we're going to give to one side or the other. The two-sex sexual aspect is clearly expressed in the presumption, not a social assumption, that the husband is father and children born to his wife during their marital relationship. See, the husband comes from what culture, and the idea of marriage is how much older? Is father and children born to his wife during this. Okay, this arises at the two-sex. I think this is part of it, but it is not the be-all and the end-all of it. That's what I'm saying. And it is more substantive than you are implying, for goddamn sure. It does not be all and end all with children. It is directly connected with the presumption, again, not merely a social assumption, that marriage is sexually consummated by coital relations. That is dependent upon your culture, my friend, and not universal. Since it is not holistically true for everybody, why insist that it is so? This sexual basis is shared directly with the sexual basis of a norm. I'm going to prove you wrong in a minute, and I'll surprise you where it comes from. This sexual basis is shared directly with the sexual basis for annulment. No marriage exists. Now, that's the argument used for annulment. That I definitely know, at least in history, the reason given for that type. I mean, that's what Henry VIII said, right? The sexual basis for adultery, grounds for dissolution of a marriage. Through and through, it is based on procreative kind of relationship. We'll get into that. I'm going to read this through first. Obviously, one-sex scenarios, whether sexual or not, are not equal of the union of husband and wife. Why? Why are they not? I see no obvious answer to what you're saying. You at best provide the proof, sir, or I won't concede such proof exists where it is not. Where the gay union idea has discarded the sexual aspect, it is further demonstrated as a poor substitute for the two-sex sexual relationship, which integrates the sexes and provides for responsible procreation. I hear a lot of funny words here. Responsible procreation, because it's your business to determine what is responsible or not, or is it God's business? And if God is responsible, shitty fucking job, guy. Where the gay union has discarded the sexual aspect, there is no lack of sexual aspect. We'll get back to this, but I'm surprised that you seem unable to understand that if procreation is the issue, it's not prevented by a gay union, by the same-sex union. They can either bring them in, they can have them while in, and if they do, why should these children while in be not considered legitimate? I think this double fucking standard, and I can prove you wrong on that one. I mean, I can prove you wrong using the Bible. I'll use the Bible to prove you incredibly short-sighted and ignorant. There are aspects of gay union that would necessitate going out of one-sex relationship to import what is extrinsic to that kind of relationship. What? Like what? What do you mean by that? I think you should use clearer words. If you have an allegation to assert, then assert with clarity. Equality of the sexes is an obvious example. I do not make the claim that the sexes are equal. You at the beginning were saying in the actual video, I remember this during the stream, you were saying that equality of the sexes is made possible through. I'm like, no. Complementary does not mean equal. We just went through a neat little example of that in the Penrose tiles, in case you didn't notice. Complementary does not mean equal. This one is smaller than that one. But we could think of one as male and one as female if you really wanted to. And then you could divide up the female one into male ones and nothing but. Or vice versa. Equality of the sexes is an obvious example. It is not obvious, which is why we were having this discussion. This becomes in gay union, segregation of the sexes as a defining feature of the kind of relationship in itself cannot be procreative in kind, nor intent, nor in outcome. Yes, it can be. Otherwise, how has the Catholic Church ever been considered a bride to Christ? Why should that be true if it is not procreative? So either you don't believe what you say you believe, or and I say in gay union because the priest class And the way that they segregate all the holy orders too, like not the lay members, but the ones who exist sort of parallel to the priests, but not as high as the bishops or higher, cannot be procreative. Bullshit. Sorry, that is bullshit. In more ways than one, in at least 2 ways, and I would say probably about 5 or 6. If you include property ownership plus the fact that they're using the property for specific procreative measures, or what amounts to procreative measures. We'll get to that. It excludes what is at the core of the marriage idea. What's that? You keep saying husband at the beginning. Remember, husbandry is core to the marriage idea. The German culture that the language inherited made sure we remember this. Husbandry means management of property. Friend. And who needs to be the manager of the property? And who's really the manager of the property? Put it in Q terms. I mean, who really runs the farm? Husband. Marriage idea arises from the two-sex nature of humankind, the two-sex nature of human procreation, and the two-sex nature of human community. Perhaps. That seems to be true the world over, that they want to have a duality in the Chinese or the Asian system of what if you either call it sophistry or numerology. They have the allowance for the male order versus the female order. So it's yin and yang. One being receptive or broken, the other one being firm or strong. This is their basic way of interpreting it. But as I pointed out last night in the odds, I'll put them down in the chat here. I pointed out last night in the video, they have coin odds, quick coin odds for the I Ching, which reflect male and female interactions. And this is what the quick coin odds say. These quick coin odds are used all over the place. If you sit down with a truth table with the 2 binary numbers 00 and 01 and fill it out, that's what this is reflecting. Which patterns you'll get when you throw coins. And it depends upon the basic binary distinction between one type and the other type. But there is no necessity which makes the numerical truth true in the outside world. It's not because the numbers say it's true that it is true. It's because what apparently seems to be true that they've been using numbers to express that. So they made a determination. Okay? Who plays the role of what does not get reflected in the numbers. Only the idealized numbers, which you can, point down, or you can point at later. Excludes what its core marriage. Marriage idea arises from. This is no pedantic take on social institution that cuts across time, geography, religious or irreligious, and is not something that sprang out of group identity politics. That's true, I agree. The basic dynamic, which is true for all of these things you just named here, time, geography, religious, irreligious, is the nature of the problem which arises when one individual who has a relationship with one or both of these people in the due process has to have an interaction with them. If you wish for your equality, and equality of the sexes, or whatever we want to call it, that's the basic problem. You now have to deal with 2 people, and any 2 people is de facto a greater power than one person. They're at an obvious advantage in every interaction, so long as they never leave one another's side. The modern reality is they're going to leave one another's side. You can't stay together like that all the time, unless you live in your own little enclave, and you perfectly cut off from everything else. Happy due process. Quite the opposite of the gay union idea. How do you know that it's quite the opposite of the gay union idea? Have you been in a gay union, or are you putting 2 and 2 together from on the outside of the cult of gay union? If you're defining yourself from the not group for this particular cult, you need to be on the inside to really make that determination or provide the evidence. Is gay union idea a key feature of the cult of gay group identity? No, not in practice, because it's about individual interactions. But yes, in a group membership. This is about the gay agenda without saying gay agenda. Is that what you're saying? Any gay individual who opposed the replacement of the marriage idea with the gay union idea was scourged, made an example of, or faced severe recrimination from loyal members of the group identity. That is probably true. I'll tell you a story before I get into the next part, Nun. I'll tell you a little story first. Once upon a time, 1992, I remember this really well. It was the first time I'd ever been to Toronto. I left Newfoundland, got on an airplane, flew to Toronto, got off the airplane and spent a full weekend downtown in Toronto on Yonge Street, right around the corner from Yonge Street, downtown. Come around the corner from the hotel, step onto Yonge Street, look up, there's the fucking CN Tower behind the rows of buildings. You got to crane your head up. People going everywhere, all hours of the day and night. I was totally amazed, perfectly happy for a few moments in time, walking down the road when there wasn't 3,000 or 4,000 people there, 5 o'clock in the morning. But I digress. During the course of the time that I was there for this particular set of meetings, it was church-related meetings. I had to share a room with a person who was from another part of Canada, happened to be of the same sex, and we did never discuss which one of us or what either one of us was interested in terms of members of the opposite sex with one another, or members of the same sex with one another. We were merely sharing the same bunking in the same hotel room because that's the way the billets were handed out, and that was the way it was. During the course of the week or the weekend, he happened to discover I was a Bible-banging evangelical who thought that gay was wrong because the Bible says so, and that's the end of it. He found that, and he was particularly hurt by this. Someone else told me. Somebody else came to me and says, "Oh, you can't be saying this." And I was concerned, and I took it to heart. I didn't mean to say or do anything like that, but I can't help what the Bible says. All I can do is interpret what this says and then try to make this line up with reality. And at the time, I was particularly ignorant about what was going to be true because of what I thought I understood before I really understood it. But what I've come to understand is that there is nothing stopping the human genetics of a person who's in a same-sex relationship from wanting to have children, from wanting to procreate, and from knowing I can't procreate with my immediate partner. Why does that discount the procreation? Why is this no longer, because it must be the genetic material from my partner? And if that's the case, then I guess I see why religious cultures who are really fucking insular have a problem with what I'm saying. I guess I can really see what it's about. It's about property. It's about actual physical bums in seats and a tenth of the income for the rest of fucking eternity. Here comes the next part. Sorry, but this is apt. This comes straight off of Wikipedia. It's off the top of Wikipedia. Marriage can be recognized by a state, an organization, a religious authority, a tribal group, a local community, or peers. It is often viewed as a contract. I'm only quoting this not to be too terribly pedantic about it, but to give us some common words, which I say we're going to be able to agree upon at a later point. But I also want to draw upon that these are the social groups which need to be paid some kind of due, and which you were alluding to down here when you say, I think you would agree. More substantive than you implied, and I don't think it actually is more substantive than I implied, because this is what I meant. We're talking about states and organizations, religious authority, tribal groups, local community, and peers. And when we're talking tribal group, local community, and peers, we're talking about a group which sometimes has common property amongst themselves, called a church, or called whatever, called what they call it, kirk, or mark, if you'd rather. When marriage is performed and carried out by the government institution in accordance with marriage laws of the jurisdiction without religious content, it is a civil marriage. Civil marriages recognize and create the rights and obligations intrinsic to matrimony before the state, whatever that means. Whatever that means. Because it's going to depend on the state that you're in. When a marriage is performed with religious content under the auspices of a religious institution, it is a religious marriage, which is what we were discussing, I believe, in that previous stream, and which I recognize. I tried to relate a story but how I'd interacted with a group of during Pride week who had singled themselves out as being religious believers who happened to be in a same-sex couple or homosexual. They happen to be religious believers who are homosexual, and that's the reason why they were having their own little sit down and, if it wasn't an echo chamber, sit down and chaw about the idea. And a large number of the people that were there they weren't all gay. They couldn't have been. They were church people who had been encouraged to come along to be partly indoctrinated, but also partly exposed to the idea that some of the people that are gay, I didn't realize they were gay. They know they've got children. They know they have relationships with people. Civil marriages recognizes and creates the rights and obligations intrinsic to matrimony before the state. Religious marriage recognizes and creates the rights and obligations intrinsic to matrimony before that religion. Religious marriage is known variously as sacramental marriage in Catholicism, nikah in Islam, Neswin in Judaism, and various other names of other faith traditions, each with their own constraints as to what constitutes and who can enter into a valid religious marriage. And in the Christian section, it marks out specifically something that Jesus is credited as saying, which I've reviewed only in the last 72 hours. In fact, in the last 24, I was looking at Matthew 19 specifically for other reasons. So they are no longer two but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. That's common to many Christian wedding ceremonies, I am sure. So if there are no children born immediately upon those words being spoken, you're telling me that the marriage doesn't count? I think we both know the real mystery, as I said before, is the two flesh becomes one right away. No babies needed. Progeny arising is a natural development when M and F partners, true, but people attracted to the same-sex partners are not prevented from having offspring. Where is nature's you don't get to have offspring cut-off switch? Because they're attracted only to specific gender or like specific sex of their own type, they don't want to have children too? I think you'll find the genetics doesn't agree with you. Reality is different than you, and if you want to call that evil because they want to have children because they're genetics, the same as any other animal on this fucking planet wants to have a child or wants to have offspring. I hear what you're saying. Why does marriage reserve that act? That particular act? Just so that you can track who owns what, perhaps? Just so you know who the mother and father is for a breeding program? That's private, man. That's the interaction between civil and religious authority. Oh yeah, that's what we're talking about. If offspring is the limiting factor, then why doesn't Jesus say so? Let no man put asunder, Solomon included. Solomon, what is baby cutting? Children from previous to the union exist. Children born during the union exist via surrogates. See fucking Abraham. Abraham was allowed to have a surrogate. Is that child, if he had a child by the surrogate, not his son? If the surrogate is recognized by the cultural tradition, so be it. So why should we be pedantic about whether or not children are legit or not? Where is our authority in this matter? I'm arguing blank anarchism on that one. Only for the sake of a limiting number of religious cultures and their arbitrary filters which don't describe reality. They just help people understand it. They don't describe reality. They don't prescribe reality. They limit and filter what you take in from reality. And if you don't allow for what you're filtering out, then how do you really know what's true? Pursuant to number 2, an excessively dogmatic application of canon law or whatever stands in its place, such as written church edicts or the Bible, despite all evidence to the contrary, means, to me, abandoning reason in favor of tradition. Superstition is at the heart of the fertility rites in marriage. Golden bow time. I love the golden bow. We're having a little look at the golden bow here tonight. Jeez. Golden Bough, Sir James Fraser, 1922, published in. This is a text which precedes anthropology in the 20th century. Like it's key to some people's understanding. For other people, they go, "Oh, you can't trust that a lot." Well, it depends. You got to use it against what else you get presented. Use it against what else is presented to you and see what it says. It's a touchstone. We find marriage listed explicitly in one or two places here. Diana is a goddess of fertility and the marriage of the gods. Two things on sacred marriage across various cultures. But the thing I'm really interested in here is Tabooed Acts, section number 1, chapters 19 through 21. Well, I'm going to do this. I'll read a little bit off of this first. Chapter 12, Sacred Marriage, Section 1, Diana as the goddess of, or as a goddess of fertility. As we've seen that according to a widespread belief, which is not without foundation in fact. I'll make sure I've got a microphone on here. Have I been rapping on all this time for nothing? Not without foundation in fact, plants reproduce their kinds through the sexual union of male and female elements. Agreed. And that on the principle of homeopathic or imitative magic, this reproduction is supposed to be stimulated by the real or mock marriage of men and women who masquerade, for the time being, as spirits of vegetation. Such magical dramas have played a great part in the popular festivals of Europe, and based as they are on a very crude conception of natural law, it is clear that they must have been handed down from a remote antiquity. We should hardly therefore err in assuming that they date from a time when the forefathers of the civilized nations of Europe were still barbarians, herding their cattle and cultivating patches of corn in the clearings of vast forests which then covered the greater part of the continent, from the Mediterranean to the Arctic Ocean. But if these old spells and enchantments for the growth of the leaves and blossoms, of grass and flowers and fruit have lingered down to our own time in the shape of pastoral plays and popular merrymakings, it is not reasonable to suppose they survived in less attenuated forms some 2,000 years ago among the civilized peoples of antiquity. Or to put it otherwise, is it not likely that certain festivals of the ancients we may now be able to detect equivalents in our own May Day, Whitsuntide, and midsummer celebrations, with this difference that in those days the ceremonies had not yet dwindled into mere shows and pageants, but were still religious or magical rites in which the actors consciously supported the high parts of the gods and goddesses? Now, the first chapter of this book, we found reason to believe that the priest who bore the title King of the Wood at Nemi had for his mate a goddess of the grove, Diana herself. May he, not he and she, the king and queen of the wood, been a more serious counterparts of the merry mummers who play the king and queen of May, the Whitsuntide bride and bridegroom in modern Europe? Very penetrating question. Marriage of the Gods is the next section. I'm not going to read it to you, but I will provide the link in the description to the whole text. Tabooed Acts, section number 1, taboos on intercourse with strangers. I'm going to make this bigger so I can more easily read it. So much for the primitive concepts of the soul and dangers to which it is exposed. These conceptions are not limited to one person or people or country. With variations of detail, they are found all over the world and survive, as we've seen, in modern Europe. Published in 1922. Beliefs so deep-seated and widespread must necessarily have contributed to shape the mold in which the early kingship was cast. For if every person was at such pains to save his own soul from the perils that threatened it on so many sides, how much more carefully must he have guarded upon those upon whose life hung in the welfare? Must have been guarded upon whose life hung in the welfare and even the existence of the whole people, and whom, therefore, it was the common interest of all to preserve. Therefore, we should expect to find the king's life protected by a system of precautions and safeguards, still more numerous and minute than those which, in primitive society, every man adopts for his own safety of his soul. Now, in point of fact, The life of the early king is regulated, as we've seen and shall see more fully presently, by a very exact code of rules. May we then not conjecture these rules are in fact the very safeguards which we should expect to find adopted for the protection of the king's life? An examination of the rules themselves confirm this conjecture. For from this it appears some of the rules observed by the kings are identical with those observed in private persons out of regard for the safety of their souls. And even those which seem peculiar to the king, many, if not all, are most readily explained on the hypothesis that they are nothing but safeguards or lifeguards of the king. I will now enumerate some of the royal rules or taboos, offering on each of them such comments and explanations as may serve to set the original intention of the rule in proper light. So he takes a guess as to what they might mean. As the object of royal taboos is to isolate the king from all sources of danger, their general effect is to compel him to live in a state of seclusion, more or less complete, according to the number and stringency of the rules he observes. Now, of all sources of danger, none are more dreaded by the savage than magic and witchcraft, and he suspects all strangers of practicing these black arts. To guard against the baneful influence exerted voluntarily or involuntarily by strangers is therefore an elementary dictate of savage prudence. Jurisprudence, savage prudence. Hence, before strangers are allowed to enter a district, or at least before they're permitted to mingle freely with the inhabitants, certain ceremonies are often performed by the natives of the country for the purpose of disarming the strangers of magical powers or of counteracting the baneful influence which is believed to emanate from them, or of disinfecting, so to speak, the tainted atmosphere by which they're supposed to be surrounded. Thus, when the ambassadors sent by Justin II, Emperor of the East II, to conclude a peace with the Turks had reached their destination, they were received by shamans and subjected them to ceremonial purification for the purpose of exorcising all harmful influences. Having deposited the goods bought by the ambassadors in an open place, these wizards carried burning branches of incense round them while they rang a bell and beat on a tambourine, snorting and falling into a state of frenzy in their efforts to dispel the powers of evil. Afterward, they purified the ambassadors themselves by leading them through flames. In the islands of Nanumea, South Pacific, strangers from ships or other islands are not allowed to communicate with the people until they all, or as few as representatives of the rest, have been taken to each of the 4 temples in the island and prayers offered that the god would avert any disease or treachery which these strangers might have brought with them. Meat offerings were also laid on the altars, accompanied by songs and dances in honor of the god. While these ceremonies were going on, of all the people, except priests and attendants, keep out of sight. So he follows up the original hypothesis by showing other examples from other cultures all over the world. Among the Danums of Borneo is the custom that strangers entering the territory should pay to natives a certain sum which is spent on the sacrifice of buffaloes or pigs or to the spirits of the land and water. I think we might have saw that in, what was it called? In order to reconcile them to the presence of the strangers and to induce them not to withdraw their favor from the people of the country, but to bless the rice harvest and so forth. Men of certain district in Borneo, fearing to look upon a European traveler lest he should make them ill, warned their wives and children not to go near him. Those who could not restrain their curiosity killed fowls to appease the evil spirits and smeared themselves with blood. More dreaded, says a traveler in central Borneo, than the evil spirits of the neighborhood are the evil spirits from a distance which accompany travelers. When a company from the middle Macaham River visited me among the Blue Cayans the year 1897, no woman showed herself outside the house without a burning bundle of plehiding bark, the stinking smoke of which drives away evil spirits. It's probable the same dread of strangers, rather than any desire to do them honor, is the motive of certain ceremonies which are sometimes observed at the reception, but of which the intention is not directly stated. On the Ong Tong Java Islands, which are inhabited by Polynesians, The priests or sorcerers sometimes or seem to wield a great influence. Their main business is to summon or exorcise spirits for the purpose of averting or dispelling sickness, procuring favorable winds, good catch of fish, and so forth. When strangers land on the islands, they are first of all received by the sorcerers, sprinkled with water, anointed with oil, and girt with dried pandanus leaves. Same time, sand and water are freely thrown about in all directions, and the newcomer and boat are wiped with green leaves. After this ceremony, the strangers are introduced by sorcerers to the chief. In Afghanistan and in some parts of Persia, the traveler, before he enters a village, is frequently received with a sacrifice of animal life or food, or of fire and incense. The Afghan boundary mission in passing by villages in Afghanistan is often met with fire and incense. Sometimes a tray of lighted embers is thrown under the hoods of travelers' horse with the words, "You are welcome." On entering a village in Central Africa, Emin Pasha was received with the sacrifice of two goats. Their blood was sprinkled in the path, and the chief stepped over the blood to greet Emin. Sometimes the dread of strangers and their magic is too great to allow for any reception on any terms. Thus, when Spek arrived at a certain village, the natives shut their doors against them because they had never before seen a white man nor the tin boxes the men were carrying. "Who knows," they said, "but that these very boxes are the plundering Watatu transformed and come to kill us? You cannot be unbidden." No persuasion could avail with them, and the party had to proceed to the next village. People are insular, I'm sure, all over. But we're not all that insular. And even the ones who are insular, they won't allow people who are different to be insular with them. That's the weird part. Intercourse with strangers. Any kind of intercourse. Doesn't matter what it is. Tabooed acts. Taboos on quitting the house. Under Chapter 19. By an extension of the like, Section 4. I've skipped over a number of sections here. I picked out ones. Eating and drinking, showing the face, quitting the house. By an extension of the like, precaution. Kings are sometimes forbidden ever to leave their palaces, or, if they are allowed to do so, their subjects are forbidden to see them abroad. The fetish king of Benin, who was worshipped as a deity by his subjects, might not quit his palace. After his coronation, the king of Loango is confined to his palace, which he may not leave. King of Onitsha did not step out of the house into the town unless a human sacrifice is made to propitiate the gods. On this account, he never goes out beyond the precincts of his premises. Indeed, we're told he may not quit his palace under pain of death or of giving up one or more slaves to be executed in his presence. As the wealth of the country is measured in slaves, you tell me you can't be procreative? The king takes good care not to infringe the law. Yet once a year at the Feast of Yams, the king is allowed and even required by custom to dance before his people outside the high mud wall of his palace. By dancing, he carries a great weight, generally a sack of earth, on his back to prove he is still able to support the burden and cares of state. Were he unable to discharge this duty, he would immediately be deposed and perhaps stoned. The kings of Ethiopia were worshipped as gods, but were mostly kept shut up in their palaces. On the mountainous coasts of Pontus there dwelt in antiquity a rude and warlike people named the Mosini, or Mosinoshi, through whose rugged country the 10,000 marched on their famous retreat from Asia to Europe. The 10,000 Spartans. They were working at the time as soldiers of fortune for Persia. Then at the end of a long and losing battle, they had to march home. These barbarians kept their king in close custody at the top of a high tower from which, after his election, he was never made more allowed to descend. Here he dispensed justice to his people. But if he offended them, they punished him by stopping his rations a whole day or even starving him to death. Kings of Sabea or Sheba, the spice country of Arabia, were not allowed to go out of their palaces. If they did so, the mob stoned them to death. But at the top of the palace there was a window with a chain attached to it. If any man deemed he had suffered wrong, he pulled the chain. The king perceived him and called him in and gave judgment. Tabooed persons. Mourners tabooed, chiefs and kings tabooed, leaving food over. These are all in chapter 19 are all on common everyday kinds of things. One type of social intercourse, but it's to do with private space. And we're only talking about kings. But what's funny is I think you can sometimes flip who's playing the king role. Is it necessarily a male? Funny to find out the female still rules. Section 3, tabooed persons. Women tabooed at menstruation and childbirth. In general, we may say that the prohibition to use the vessels, garments, and so forth of certain persons and the effects supposed to follow an infraction of the rule are exactly the same whether the persons to whom the things belong are sacred or what we might call unclean and polluted, sacred or profane, like customarily worshipped and deified, or customarily tabooed and discount. I wouldn't call it discounted, but vilified. As the garments which have been touched by the sacred chief kill those who handle them. Well, I guess you can see where one of those little parables come from. So do the things which have been touched by menstruous women. As an Australian blackfellow who discovered that his wife had lain on his blanket at her menstrual period, killed her, and died of terror himself within a fortnight. Dupras. Hence, Australian women at these times are forbidden under pain of death to touch anything that men use, or even walk on a path that any man frequents. They are also secluded at childbirth, and all vessels used by them during their seclusion are burned. In Uganda, the pots which a woman touches while the impurity of childbirth or of menstruation is on her should be destroyed. Spears and shields defiled by her touch are not destroyed, but only purified. Their intrinsic worth is too great. Their intrinsic worth, their property value is so great you wouldn't destroy them. We're only going to purify them. Oh, I see. Among all the Dene and most of the American tribes, hardly any other being was the object of more dread as menstruating women. Soon as any signs of the condition made themselves apparent in a young girl, she was carefully segregated from all but female company and had to live by herself in a small hut away from the gaze of the villagers or of male members of a roving band. While in that awful state, she had to abstain from touching anything belonging to a man or of the spoils of any venison or other animal, unless she would thereby pollute the same, condemn the hunters to failure owing to the anger of the game thus slighted. Dried fish formed her diet, and cold water, absorbed through a drinking tube, was her only beverage. Moreover, as the very sight of her was dangerous to society, a special skin bonnet, with fringes falling over her face down to her breasts, hid her from the public gaze, even some time after she'd recovered from her normal state. Among the Bree Indians of Costa Rica, a menstruous woman is regarded as unclean. Only plates she may use for her food are banana leaves, which, when she is done with them, she throws away in a sequestered spot. For where a cow to find them and eat them, the animal will waste away and perish. She drinks out of a special vessel for like reason, because if anyone drank out of the same cup after her, he would surely die. Among many peoples, similar restrictions are imposed on a woman in childbirth, and apparently for similar reasons. Such periods, women are supposed to be in dangerous condition which would infect any person or thing that they might touch. Hence, they are put into quarantine until, with the recovery of their health and strength, the imaginary danger is passed away. I can tell a funny story about this. This was true in the West until fairly recently. Because, the birth rate went up as well as with modern medicine. Went way, way up. Thus, in Tahiti, a woman after childbirth a woman after childbirth was secluded for a fortnight or 3 weeks in a temporary hut erected on sacred ground. During the time of her seclusion, she was debarred from touching provisions and had to be fed by another. Further, if anyone touched the child at this period, he was subjected to the same restrictions as the mother until the ceremony of her purification had been performed. If anyone touched the child at this period, he was subjected to the same restrictions as the mother until the ceremony of her purification had been performed. I wonder, are they in the same hut? Similarly, in the island of Kodiak off Alaska, a woman about to be delivered retires to a miserable low hovel built out of reeds where she must remain for 20 days after the birth of her child, whatever the season, and she's considered so unclean that no one will touch her, and food is reached to her on sticks. The Bree Indians regard the pollution of childbed as much more dangerous even than of menstruation. When a woman feels her time approaching, as she informs her husband, who makes haste to build the hut in a lonely spot. Or she informs her husband, who makes haste to build a hut for her in a lonely spot. There she must live alone, holding no converse with anyone save her mother or another woman. After her delivery, the medicine man purifies her by breathing on her, laying an animal, it matters not, upon her. But even after this ceremony, only mitigates her uncleanness into a state considered to be equivalent to that of a menstruous woman, and for a full lunar month she must live apart from her housemates, observing the same kind of rules with regard to eating and drinking as at her monthly period. Case is still worse, pollution is still more deadly, if she has had a miscarriage or has delivered a stillborn child. In that case, she must not go or may not go near a living soul. Mere contact with the things she has used is exceedingly dangerous. Her food is handed to her at the end of a long stick. It generally lasts for 3 weeks, after which she may go home, subject only to restrictions incident to an ordinary confinement. Some Bantu tribes entertain even more exaggerated notions of the virulent infection spread by a woman who has had a miscarriage and has concealed it. An experienced observer of these people tells us that the blood of childbirth appears to the eyes of the South Africans to be tainted with a pollution still more dangerous than that of the menstrual fluid. The husband is excluded from the hut for 8 days of the lying-in period, chiefly from fear that he may be contaminated by the secretion. He dare not take his child in his arms for the three first months after the birth. But the secretion of childbed is particularly terrible when the product of the miscarriage, especially a concealed miscarriage. In this case, it's not merely the man who's threatened or killed, it's the whole country. It's the sky itself which suffers. By a curious association of ideas, a physiological fact causes cosmic troubles. As for the disastrous effect which a miscarriage may have had on a whole country, I'll quote the words of the medicine man and rainmaker of the Bapedi tribe. When a woman has had a miscarriage, when she's allowed her blood to flow and has hidden the child, it's enough to cause the burning winds to blow and to parch the country with heat. The rain no longer falls, for the country is no longer in order. When the rain approaches the place where the blood is, it will not dare to approach. It will fear and remain at a distance. That woman has committed a great fault. She spoiled the country of the chief, for she has hidden blood which has not yet been well congealed to fashion a man. That blood is taboo. We should never drip on the road. The chief will assemble his men and say to them, "Are you in order in your villages?" Someone will answer, "Such and such a woman was pregnant, and yet we have not seen the child which she has given birth to." Then they'll go and arrest the woman. They'll say to her, "Show us where you have hidden it." They will go and dig at the spot. They'll sprinkle the hole with a decoction of 2 sorts of roots prepared by a special pot. They take a little of the earth from this grave and they throw it into a river. Then they bring back water from the river and sprinkle it where she shed her blood. She herself must wash every day with the medicine. Then the country will be moistened again by rain. Further, we medicine men, some of the women of the country, we tell them to prepare a ball of earth We could read this in more than one way. We tell them, prepare a ball of the earth which contains the blood. They bring it to us one morning. If we wish to prepare medicine with which to sprinkle the whole country, we crumble this earth to powder. At the end of 5 days, we send little boys and little girls that yet know nothing of women's affairs and have not yet had relations with men. We put the medicine in the horns of oxen. These children go all up the fords, all to the other entrances of the country. A little girl turns up the soil with her mattock. The others dip a branch in the horn and sprinkle the insides of the hole, saying, rain, rain. So we remove the misfortune which the women have brought. On the roads, rain will be able to come, and the country be purified. Chapter 21, Section 1, the meaning of taboo. Thus, in primitive society, the rules of ceremonial purity observed by divine kings, chiefs, priests, agree in many respects with the rules observed by homicides, mourners, women in childbed, girls at puberty, hunters and fishermen, and so on. To us, these various classes of person appear to differ totally in character and condition. Some of them we should call holy, and others we might pronounce unclean and polluted, but yet the savage makes no such moral distinction between them. The conceptions of holiness and pollution are not yet differentiated in his mind. To him, common feature of all these persons is that they are dangerous and in danger, and the danger which they stand and to which they expose others is what we should call spiritual or ghostly, and therefore imaginary. The danger, however, is not less real because it is imaginary. I allowed for imaginary numbers yesterday. Imagination acts upon man as real as does gravitation, and may kill him as certainly as a dose of prussic acid. To seclude these persons from the rest of the world so that the dreaded spiritual danger should neither reach them nor spread from them is the object of the taboos which they have to observe. These taboos act, so to say, as electrical insulators to preserve the spiritual force which these persons are charged from suffering or inflicting harm by contact with the outer world. In other words, taboo is the reason why excommunication is common to all human culture, not just the Catholic Church. Every religious culture, every Christian culture practices it, but they don't really talk about it. Scientology famously. To the illustrations of the general principles which have already been given, I shall now add some more, drawing my examples first from a class of tabooed things, and second, from a class of tabooed words. For in the opinion of the savage, both things and words may, like persons, be charged and electrified, either temporarily or permanently, from the mysterious virtue of taboo, and may therefore require to be banished for a longer or shorter time from the familiar usage of common life. And the examples will be chosen for a special reference to those sacred chiefs, kings, and priests who, by more than anyone else, live fenced off about by taboo as by a wall. Tabooed things will be illustrated in the present chapter and tabooed words in the next. Tabooed things: iron tabooed, sharp weapons, blood, the head, hair, ceremonies at hair cutting, spittle, foods, knots and rings. And then taboo words: personal names, names of relations, personal names, names of relations, names of the dead, kings and other sacred persons, names of gods we don't need. Iron. In the first place, iron is a very specific kind of property. In the first place, we may observe the awful sanctity of kings naturally leads to the prohibition to touch their sacred persons. It was unlawful to lay hands on the person of a Spartan king. No one may touch the body of the king or queen of Tahiti. Forbidden to touch the person of the king of Siam under pain of death. And no one may touch the king of Cambodia for any purpose whatever without his express command. July 1874, the king was thrown from his carriage, lay insensible on the ground, but not one of his suite dared touch him. European coming on the spot carried the injured monarch from the place. Formerly, no one might touch the king of Korea, And if he deigned to touch the subject, the spot touched became sacred, and all the person thus honored had to wear a visible mark, generally a cord of red silk, for the rest of his life. Above all, no iron may touch a king's body. Above all, no iron. I wonder why. Gee, I wonder why. (1800) King Cheng Sung Tai Wang died of a tumor in the back, no one dreaming of employing the lancet, which would probably have saved his life. It said that one king suffered terribly from an abscess of the lip, but till the physician called in a jester whose pranks made the king laugh, and so the abscess burst. Roman and Sabine priests may not have shaved with iron, but only with bronze razors or shears. And whenever an iron graving tool was brought into the sacred gold of the Arval brothers at Rome for the purpose of cutting an inscription on a tomb, an expiatory sacrifice of a lamb and a pig must be offered, which was repeated when the graving tool was removed from the grove. As a general rule, iron may not be brought into Greek sanctuaries. In Crete, sacrifices were often to Menedemus without the use of iron, because the legend ran that Menedemus had been killed by an iron weapon in the Trojan War. The Archon of Plataea may not touch iron, but once a year at the annual commemorations of the men who fell at the Battle of Plataea, he's allowed to carry a sword wherewith to sacrifice a bull. On this day, a Hottentot priest, to this day, a Hottentot priest never uses an iron knife, but always a sharp splint of quartz in sacrificing an animal or circumcising a lad. Gee, a lad. After the Ovambo of Southwest Africa, custom requires that lads be circumcised with a sharp flint. If none is at hand, the operation may be performed with iron, but the iron must afterwards be buried. Amongst the Moqui of Arizona, stone knives, hatchets, and so on have passed out of common use, but are retained in religious ceremony. After the Pawnee had ceased to use stone arrowheads for ordinary purpose, they still employed them to slay the sacrifices, whether human captives or buffalo or deer. Amongst the Jews, no iron tool was used in building the temple at Jerusalem or in making an altar. There are really interesting passages in the Bible talking about iron. How it finds iron hard to deal with. And building a temple or making an altar. The old wooden bridge Pons Sublicis at Rome, which was considered sacred, was made and had to be kept in repair without the use of iron or of bronze. Expressly provided by law, the temple of Jupiter Liber at Ferfo must be repaired with iron tools. Provided by. The council chamber at Cyzicus was constructed of wood without any nails. Cyzicus, I guess. The beams being so arranged that they could be taken out and replaced. The superstitious objection to iron probably dates from that early time in history of society when iron was still a novelty. It was not a novelty in India when it was still a novelty in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean. And as such was viewed with suspicion and dislike. For everything new is apt to excite with awe and dread the savage. It's a curious superstition, says a pioneer at Borneo, that of the Duzuns, to attribute anything, whether good or bad, lucky or unlucky, that happens to them to something novel which has happened or arrived in their country. For instance, my landing or living in Kindram has caused an intensely hot weather we have experienced lately. Unusually heavy rains which happened to follow the English survey of the Nicobar Islands in the winter of 1886 were imputed by the alarmed natives to the wrath of the spirits of the theodolites, dumpy levelers, and other strange instruments that had been set up by so many of their favorite haunts. Some of them proposed to soothe the anger of the spirits by sacrificing a pig. In the 17th century, a succession of bad seasons excited a revolt among the Estonian peasantry, who traced the origin of the evil to a watermill, which put a stream to some inconvenience by checking the flow. First introduction of iron plowshares to Poland having been followed by a succession of bad harvests, farmers attributed the badness of the crops to the iron plowshares and discarded them for the old wooden ones. To this day, the primitive Badui of Java, who lived chiefly by husbandry, will use no iron tools in tilling their fields. The general dislike of innovation, which always makes itself strongly felt in the sphere of religion, is sufficient by itself to account for the superstition aversion to iron entertained by kings and priests and attributed by them to the gods. Possibly this aversion has been intensified in places by some such accidental cause as the series of bad seasons which cast discredit on iron plowshares in Poland. But the disfavor in which iron is held in the gods and their ministers has another side. Their antipathy to the metal furnishes men with a weapon which may be turned against the spirits when occasion serves. As their dislike of iron is supposed to be so great that they will not approach persons or things protected by the obnoxious metal, iron may obviously be employed as a charm for banning ghosts and other dangerous spirits. And often it is so used. Thus, in the Highlands of Scotland, the great safeguard against the elfin race is iron, or better yet, steel. Metal in any form, whether as a sword, a knife, a gun barrel, or whatnot, is all powerful for this purpose. Whether you enter a fairy dwelling, you should always remember to stick a piece of steel, such as a knife, a needle, or a fishhook, into the door, for the elves will not be able to shut the door till you come out again. So too, when you have shot the deer when you have shot a deer and are bringing it home at night, be sure to thrust a knife into the carcass to keep the fairies from laying their weight on it. A knife or nail in your pocket is quite enough to prevent the fairies from lifting you up at night. Nails in the front of the bed ward off elves from women in the straw and from their babes. But to make quite sure, it's better to put the smothering or smoothing iron under the bed, and the reaping hook in the window. If a bull has fallen over a rock and has been killed, a nail stuck into it will preserve the flesh from the fairies. Music discoursed on a Jew's harp keeps the elven woman away from the hunter because the tongue of the instrument is of steel. The Morocco iron is considered a great protection against demons, since it is usual to put a knife or dagger under a sick man's pillow. Singhalese believe that they are constantly surrounded by evil spirits who will lie in wait for them to do harm. A peasant would not dare to carry good food, such as cakes or roast meat, from one place or another without putting an iron nail on it to prevent a demon from taking possession of the viands and making the eater ill. No sick person, whether man or woman, would venture out of the house without a bunch of keys or a knife in his hand, for without such a talisman he would fear the devil would be able to take advantage of the weak state to slip into his body. And if a man has a large sore on his body and tries to keep a morsel of iron onto it, as protection against demons. On the slave coast, when a mother sees her child gradually wasting away, she conceives that a demon has entered into the child, makes her measures accordingly. To lure the demon out of the body of her offspring, she offers a sacrifice of food while the devil is bolting it. She attaches iron rings and small bells to her child's ankles and hangs iron chains around his neck. The jangling of the iron and the tinkling of the bells are supposed to prevent the demon, when he has concluded his repast, from entering again into the body of the little sufferer. Hence, many children may be seen in parts of Africa weighed down in iron ornaments. Tabooed words. Section 1. Personal names tabooed. Unable to discriminate clearly between words and things, the savage commonly fancies that the link between a name and a person or a thing denominated by it is not merely arbitrary and ideal association, but a real and substantial bond which unites the two in such a way that magic may be wrought on a man just as easily through his name as through his hair, his nails, or any other material part of his person. In fact, any other material part of his person, because, his property is also considered his person. In fact, primitive man regards his name as a vital portion of himself and takes care of it accordingly. Thus, for example, a North American Indian regards his name not as a mere label, but as a distinct part of his personality, just as much as his eyes or his teeth, and believes that injury will result as surely from the malicious handling of a name as is from a wound inflicted on any part of a physical organism. This belief was found among the various tribes from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and has occasioned a number of curious regulations in regard to concealment and change of names. Some Esquimaux, meaning Eskimo, take new names when they are old, hoping thereby to get a new lease on life. The Tolampu of the Celebes believe that if you write a man's name down, you carry off his soul along with you. Many savages of the present day regard their names as vital parts of themselves, therefore take great pains to conceal their real names, lest they should give to evil-disposed people a handle by which to injure their owners. Thus, to begin with the savages who rank at the bottom of the social scale, we are told that the secrecy with which among the Australian Aborigines personal names are often kept from general knowledge arises in great measure from the belief that an enemy who knows your name has in it something which he can use magically to your detriment. Magically? He can certainly... Identity. An Australian black, says another writer, is always unwilling, very unwilling to tell you his real name. And there's no doubt that the reluctance is due to the fear that through his name he may be injured by sorcery. Amongst the tribes of Central Australia, every man, woman, and child has, beside a personal name which is in common use, a secret or sacred name which is bestowed by the older men upon him, or upon him by the older men upon, not just man, upon him or her soon after birth, and which is known to none but the fully initiated members of the group. Because if we're talking tribal association and tribal property, then the nation itself is born from the act of marriage. But that's also true for civil, and it doesn't matter if you're same sex or not, because unless you're telling me that they got snip too, or fallopian tubes tied, or that happens automatically or something, I don't think so. Given to after birth, which is known to none but the fully initiated members of the group. The secret name is never mentioned except upon the most solemn occasions. To utter it in the hearing of women or of men of another group would be the most serious breach of tribal custom. Serious is the most flagrant case of sacrilege amongst ourselves. When mentioned at all, the name is spoken only in a whisper, and not until the most elaborate precautions have been taken that it should be heard by none but the members of the group. Native thinks that the stranger, knowing his real secret name, would have a special power to work ill on him by means of magic. Chapter 22, Tabooed Words. Names of relations tabooed. Names of relations taboo. This is where the word bastard arises from. Might naturally be expected that the reserve so commonly maintained with regard to personal names would be dropped or at least relaxed among friends and relations. But the reverse of this is often the case. It's precisely the persons most intimately connected by blood, and especially by marriage, to whom this rule applies with the greatest stringency. The persons most intimately connected by blood, and especially by marriage, to whom the rule applies with the greatest stringency. Why is it applies to marriage? Because the offspring? No. Because the union in the here and now. Because they're now going to say that it's their blood, that they are of the same blood, when in fact they may not be of the same blood. But we're going to consider them as being from the same blood. Because it's about, spiritual matters, blood. It's nothing at all to do with anything other than that and property. The people connected by marriage are not often related by blood. The closer they're related by blood, the less often that marriage system is going to work. The less often in time. You got to intermix. You got no option. In a sense, in a sense, if you believe that the world is overpopulated with human beings, and you also believe that gay union is wrong or somehow intrinsically, morally, ethically wrong, it's funny to think that you wouldn't be cool with the second one as a natural response against the first. A natural, perfectly natural response. Some people are often forbidden not only to pronounce each other's names, but even to utter ordinary words which resemble or have a single syllable in common with those names. The persons who are thus mutually disbarred from mentioning each other's names are especially husbands and wives, a man and his wife's parents, and a woman and her husband's father. For example, among the Kafras, a woman may not publicly pronounce the birth name of her husband or of any of his brothers, nor may she use the interdicted word in its ordinary sense. If her husband, for instance, to be called Umpaka, from Impaka, a small feline animal, she must speak of that beast by some other name. If her husband be called Umpaka, from Impaka, a small feline animal, then she must speak of that beast by some other name. Further, a Kafra wife is forbidden to pronounce even mentally the names of her father-in-law and all her husband's male relations in the ascending line. Whenever the emphatic syllable of any other names occurs in another word, she must avoid it by substituting either an entirely new word or at least another syllable in its place. Hence, this custom was given rise to an almost distinct language among the women, which the Kafras call women's speech. The interpretation of this women's speech is naturally very difficult. A custom is given rise to almost distinct language among the women, which the Kafras call women's speech. The interpretation of this women's speech is naturally very difficult, for no definite rules can be given for the formation of these substituted words, for it's possible to form a dictionary of them, their number being so great. Since there be many women, even of the same tribe, who would be no more at liberty to use the substitutes employed by some others than they are to use the original words themselves. So they gang up to be able to get enough good ideas to work with. They have developed their own subset of language for it. It's interesting. That's imaginary numbers at work. A Kafra man on his side may not mention the name of his mother-in-law, nor may she pronounce his, but he is free to utter words in which the emphatic syllable of her name occurs. The Kyrgyz woman dares not pronounce the name of the older relations of her husband, nor even use the words which resemble them in sound. For example, one of these relations is called shepherd. She may not speak of sheep. She must call them the bleeding ones. If his name is lamb, she must refer to lambs as the young bleeding ones. In southern India, wives believe that to tell their husbands' names or to pronounce it even in a dream would bring them an untimely end. Among the Sea Dayaks, a man may not pronounce the name of his father-in-law or mother-in-law without incurring the wrath of the spirits. And since he reckons as his father-in-law and mother-in-law, not only his father and mother, since he reckons as his father-in-law and mother-in-law not only the father and mother of his own wife, but also the fathers and mothers of his brothers' wives and sisters' husbands, likewise the fathers and mothers of all of his cousins, the number of tabooed names may be very considerable, and the opportunities of error correspondingly numerous. To make confusion worse confounded, names of persons are often the names of common things, such as moon, bridge, barley, cobra, leopard, so that when any of the man's many fathers-in-laws and mothers-in-laws are called by such names, these common words may not pass his lips. Among the Alfurs of Minahasa in Celebes, the custom is carried still further on so as to forbid even the use of words which merely resemble the personal names in sound. It is especially the name of the father-in-law which is thus laid under an interdict. If he, for example, is called Kalala, his son-in-law may not speak of a horse by its common name, Kawalo. He must call it a riding beast, Sensakajan. So among the Alfoors of the island of Beru, it is taboo to mention the names of the parents and parents-in-law, or even speak the common objects by words which resemble these names in sound. Thus, if your mother-in-law is called Dalu, which is meant betel, she may not ask for betel by its ordinary name. You must ask for red mouth. If you want to betel leaf, you may not say betel leaf, Dalu mun. Dalu mun, leaf. Interesting. Moon. You must say Caron Fena. The same island, it's also taboo to mention the name of an elder brother in his presence. Transgressions of these rules are punished with fines. With fines! In Sunda, it is thought that a particular crop would be spoilt if a man were to mention the names of his father and mother. Among the Newfoors of the Dutch New Guinea, persons who are related to each other by marriage are forbidden to mention each other's names. Among the connections whose names are thus tabooed are wife, mother-in-law, father-in-law, your wife's uncles and aunts, and also her granduncles and grandaunts, and the whole of your wife's or husband's family in the same generation as yourself, except that men may mention the names of their brothers-in-law, though women may not. The taboo comes into operation as soon as the betrothal has taken place and before the marriage has been celebrated. The taboo comes into operation as soon as betrothal has taken place and before the marriage has been celebrated. Wow, if there was a general taboo against this kind of thing and it turned out that speaking bad against someone counts, I could see why some religious cultures might be a little bit concerned about this one. Families thus connected by the betrothal of two of their members are not only forbidden to pronounce each other's names, they may not even look at each other. Look at that. Families thus connected by betrothal of two of their members are not only forbidden to pronounce each other's names, they may not even look at one another. And the rule gives rise to most comical scenes which they happen when they happen to meet unexpectedly. Not merely the names themselves, but any words that sound like them are scrupulously avoided and other words used in place. If it should chance that a person has inadvertently uttered a forbidden name, he must at once throw himself on the floor and say, I have mentioned the wrong name. I throw it through the chinks of the floor in order that I may eat well. The Western Islands of the Torres Strait. A man never mentions the personal name of his father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law, and a woman was subject to the same restrictions. A brother-in-law might be spoken of as the husband or brother of someone whose name it was lawful to mention. Similarly, a sister-in-law may be called the wife of so-and-so. So, if a man by chance used the personal name of his brother-in-law, he was ashamed and hung his head. His shame was only relieved when he had made a present as compensation to the man whose name he'd taken in vain. Same compensation was made to the sister-in-law, father-in-law, and mother-in-law for an accidental mentioning of the name. Among the natives who inhabit the coast of the Gazelle Peninsula in New Britain, to mention the name of a brother-in-law is the greatest possible affront you could offer him. Crime punishable with death. In the Banks Islands, Melanesia, the taboo laid on the names of persons connected with marriage are very strict. A man will not mention the name of his father-in-law, much less the name of a mother-in-law, nor may he name his wife's brother. But he may name his wife's sister. She's nothing to him. She is nothing to him. A woman may not name her father-in-law, nor on any account her son-in-law, nor on any account her son-in-law. A woman may not name her father-in-law, nor in any account her son-in-law. How can it be her son-in-law? Pretty forward thinking. Not only are all of these persons forbidden to utter each other's names, they may not even pronounce ordinary words which chance to be either identical with these names or have any other syllables in common. Thus we hear of a native in these islands who might not use the common words for pig or to die, because these words occurred in a polysyllabic name of his son-in-law. We are told of another unfortunate may not pronounce the everyday words hand and hot on account of his wife's brother's name, who was even debarred from mentioning the number one, because the word for one formed part of the name of his wife's cousin. The sound of one hand clapping would have really started them up. Yeah. The pigs, one pig's hand clapping. The reluctance to mention the name or even syllables of the name of the persons connected with the speaker by marriage can hardly be separated from the reluctance evinced by so many people to utter their own names or the names of the dead or the dead of chiefs and kings. And if the reticence to these latter names springs mainly from superstition, we may infer that the reticence to the former has no better foundation. That is, farther up the chain for names of kings, names of gods. You can see why, at least at this level, at the level of family and interconnectedness, like blood relation, to put it one way, but it's also, genetic clusters and allele groups. Whatever tribal arrangement. To the savage's unwillingness to mention his own name is based at least in part on superstitious fear of the ill use he may have made of him by his foes, whether human or spiritual, has already been shown. It remains to examine similar usage in regard to the names of the dead and of royal personages. Chapter 22. Our debt to the savage, a whole bunch of other ones here. Temporary king, sacrifice to the king's son, succession of the soul, killing of the tree spirit. He was referred to earlier. Attis is god of vegetation. There's some interesting things. There are a bunch of different comparisons of ritualistic systems, not limited to any group, time, space, or part of the world. It's worldwide, this study. Songs for corn reapers, human sacrifices for the crops. Corn spirit is a wolf or dog, cock, hare, cat, corn or whatever grain you're talking about. Particularly some common archetypes here. Sacrifice or sacrament of the first fruits, eating the god among the Aztecs. Homeopathic magic of a fresh diet. Yes, that's an interesting part of this. Divine animal. I didn't actually plan to read this one. Seeing that corn spirit is represented sometimes as human, sometimes in animal form, and that in both cases he is killed in the person of his representative and eaten sacramentally. To find examples of actually killing the human representative of the corn spirit, we are naturally to go to the savage races, but the harvest suppers of our European peasants have furnished unmistakable examples of a sacramental eating of animals as representative of the corn spirit. I had a discussion online in the last several hours about this very thing. Transference of evil to other objects, to men, to transference of evil in Europe. Omnipresence of demons, occasional expulsion of evil, periodic expulsion of evil, expulsion of embodied evils, public scapegoats. Chapter 57. I plan to go here to chapter 60 because seclusions of girls at puberty gets its own chapter. A whole bunch of chapters leading into it. Public scapegoats, section 1, expulsion of embodied evils. So thus far we've dealt with the class of the general expulsion of evils, which I've called direct or immediate. This class, the evils are invisible, at least to the common eye, and the mode of deliverance consists for the most part in beating the empty air and raising such a hubbub as may scare the mischievous spirits and put them to flight. It remains to illustrate in the second class of expulsions which the evil influences are embodied in a visible form, or at least supposed to be loaded upon a material medium which acts as a vehicle to draw them off the people, village, or town. The Pomos of California celebrate an expulsion of devils every 7 years in which the devils are represented by disguised men. Someone gets elected to do this. 20 or 30 men array themselves into harlequin rig and barbaric paint, or put vessels of pitch on their heads and go secretly out into the surrounding mountains there to personify the devils. So they play both parts, both God and devil. A herald goes up to the top of the assembly house, makes a speech about to the multitude. The signal agreed upon in the evening, the masqueraders come in from the mountains, and their vessels of pitch flaming above their heads, and all the frightful accessories of noise, motion, and costume, which the savage mind can devise in representation of demons. Terrified women and children flee for life. The men huddle them inside a circle, and on the principle of fighting the devil with fire, they swing blazing firebrands in the air, yell, whoop, and make frantic dashes at the marauding, bloodthirsty devil, so creating a terrific spectacle, striking great fear into the hearts of the assembled hundreds of women, who are screaming and fainting and clinging at their valorous protectors. Finally, the devils succeed in getting into the assembly house, and the bravest of the men enter and hold a parley with them. As a conclusion with the whole farce, the men summon courage, the devils are expelled from the assembly house, and the prodigious row and racket of sham fighting are chased away into the mountains. In spring, as soon as the willow leaves are full grown in the banks of the river, the Mandan Indians celebrated their great annual feast, one of the features of which was the expulsion of the devil. A man painted black to represent the devil entered the village from the prairie, chased and frightened the women, acted as part of a buffalo bull in the buffalo dance, the object of which was to ensure a plentiful supply of buffalo during the ensuing year. Here's the Chenk. Buffalo supply. Finally, he was chased from the village, women pursuing him with hisses and jibes, beating him with sticks, and pelting him with dirt. Often, however, the expelled demons are not represented here at all, but understood to be presently invisible in the material invisible vehicle which conveys them away. Hence, here again it will be convenient to distinguish between occasional and periodic expulsion. So, scapegoating. Human scapegoats in the classical antiquity. The Roman Saturnalia, a great example. Not to touch the earth. Taboo to the king not to touch the earth itself, which is why the red carpet. Not to see the sun. Second rule here noted is that the sun may not shine upon the divine person, as in any absolute monarch. This rule was observed both by the Mikado and the Pontiff of the Zapotecs. The latter was looked upon as a god whom the earth was not worthy to hold, nor the sun to shine upon. The Japanese would not allow the Mikado should be exposed as a sacred person to open air. The sun was not thought worthy to shine on his head. The Indians of Grenada and South America kept those who were to be rulers or commanders, whether men or women, locked them up for several years when they were children, some of them 7 years. And this so close so they were not to see the sun. For if they should happen to see it, they forfeited their lordship, eating certain sorts of food appointed, and those who were their keepers at certain times went into retreat or prison and scourged them severely. Thus, for example, the heir to the throne of Bagoda, who was not the son but the sister son of the king, had to undergo a rigorous training from his infancy. He lived in complete retirement in a temple, where he might not see the sun, nor eat salt, nor converse with a woman, surrounded by guards who observed his conduct and noted all his actions. If he broke one single rule laid down for him, it was deemed infamous and forfeited all his rights to the throne. So too, the heir of the kingdom of Sogamaso, before succeeding the crown, had to fast for 7 years in the temple, being shut up in the dark and not allowed to see the light of day. Or light at all, obviously. The prince who was to become Inca of Peru had to fast for a month without seeing the light. Seclusion of girls at puberty. Look how long this one. I'm not reading all this. It is remarkable that for the foregoing 2 rituals, not to touch the ground and not to see the sun, not to touch the earth, not to see the sun. That's Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison obviously worked off of something. Are observed either separately or conjointly by girls at puberty in many parts of the world. What? We would treat a girl at puberty as being exactly the same as the king themselves, the monarch. Thus, among the Negroes of Loango, girls at puberty are confined in separate huts. They may not touch the ground with any part of a bare body. Among the Zulus and kindred tribes of South Africa, the first signs of puberty show themselves while a girl is walking, gathering wood, or working in a field. She runs for the river and hides herself in the reeds for a day, so as not to be seen. Covers her head carefully with her blanket, so that the sun will not shine on it and shrivel her up into a withered skeleton, as would result from exposure to the sun's beams. After dark, she returns at home and is secluded in a hut for some time. As with Awanakande, tribe in the Awanakande, a tribe in the northern end of Lake Nyasa, is a rule that after her first menstruation, a girl child must be kept apart from a few companions of her own sex in a darkened house. Floor is covered with dry banana leaves, and no fire may be lit in the house, which is called the house of the Awasungu, that is, of the maidens who have no hearts. Sorry. That's an interesting little chapter. Reason for the seclusions of girls at puberty. This is his conclusive reasons. The motive for the restraint so commonly imposed on girls at puberty is the deeply ingrained dread of which primitive man universally entertains of menstruous blood. See, this is where I don't necessarily agree with everything that the Golden Bough says. He fears it at all times, especially in its first appearance. Hence, the restrictions under which women lie at their first menstruation are usually more stringent than those which they have to observe on subsequent recurrence of the mysterious flow. Some evidence to the fear and of the customs based on it have cited in an earlier part of this work, but as for the terror, it is nothing less than the phenomena periodically strikes the minds of savages, as deeply influenced his life and institutions, may be well to illustrate the subject with some further examples. There's one of the reasons, I think, one of the most obvious reasons is that human beings can observe other animals which also seem to menstruate. I mean not women, I mean other animals. The females of other species, also mammals, also evidence the same set of behaviors to some degree. Thus, in the Encounter Bay tribe of South Australia, there is, or used to be, a superstition which obliges a woman to separate herself from the camp at the time of her monthly illness, when, if a young man or boy should approach, she calls out and she immediately makes a circuit to avoid her. If she is neglectful upon this point, she exposes herself to scolding and sometimes to severe beating by her husband and nearest relation. Gee, I wonder why. This is a funny discussion. Because the boys are told from their infancy that if they see the blood, they will early become gray-headed and their strength will fail prematurely. The Dieri of Central Australia believe that if women at these times were to eat fish or bathe in a river, the fish would all die and the water would dry up. The Arunta of the same region forbid menstruous women to gather the Irakura bulbs, which form a staple article of diet for both men and women. Think that were a woman to break this rule, the supply of bulbs would fail. Among the civilized nations of Europe, the superstitions which cluster around this mysterious aspect of woman nature are not less extravagant than those which prevail among savages. The oldest existing encyclopedia, Natural History of Pliny, the list of dangers apprehended from menstruation is longer than any furnished by mere barbarians. According to Pliny the Younger Elder, Pliny, touch of a menstruous woman turned wine to vinegar, blighted crops, killed seedlings, blasted gardens, brought down the fruit from trees, dimmed mirrors, blunted razors, rusted iron and brass, especially from the waning of the moon, at the waning of the moon, killed bees and at least drove them from their hives, caused mares to miscarry, and so forth. Similarly, in various parts of Europe, it's still believed that if a woman in her courses enters a brewery for beer, it will turn sour. If she touches beer, wine, or vinegar, beer, wine, or vinegar, or milk, it will go bad. If she makes jam, it won't keep. If she mounts a mare, it'll miscarry. If she touches buds, they will wither. If she touches buds, they will wither. So Jesus must have been menstruating. If she climbs a cherry tree, it will die. In Brunswick, people think that if a menstruous woman assists the killing of a pig, the pork will putrefy. Greek island of Kalymnos. A woman at such times may not go to a well and draw water, nor cross a running stream, nor enter the sea. Presence in a boat is said to raise storms. Thus the object of excluding women at menstruation is to neutralize the dangerous influences, which we have all kinds of reasons for, but there are other explanations for, which are supposed to emanate from them at such times. Thus, the danger is believed to be especially great. The first menstruation appears from unusual precautions taken to isolate girls at this crisis. What he calls crisis. Two of these precautions have been illustrated above, namely the rules so that girls may not touch the ground nor see the sun. General effect of these rules is to keep her suspended, so as to say, between heaven and earth. Thus, eternally somehow. Which is, they anticipate, what do they call it? Maidens without hearts, because they haven't got a husband yet. Whether enveloped in her hammock or slung up to a roof, as in South America, or raised to the ground in a dark and narrow cage, as in New Ireland, she may be considered to be out of the way of doing mischief, such being shut off from both the earth and from the sun. She can poison neither of these great sources of life by her deadly contagion. In short, she is rendered harmless by being, in electrical language, insulated. Insular. You're goddamn right. But the precautions taken to isolate or insulate. I'm not saying this is bad or good. All I'm saying is he's describing what is true about reality. This is the way that we explain how we isolate ourselves and how we particularly isolate particular parts of the gene pool. Where was I? But the precautions thus taken to isolate or insulate the girls are dictated by a regard for her own safety as well as for the safety of others. It is thought that she herself would suffer if she were to neglect the prescribed regimen. Thus Zulu girls we have seen imagine they would shrivel to skeletons if the sun were to shine on them. And the Makusis imagine that if a young woman were to transgress the rules, she would suffer from sores on the various parts of her body. In short, the girl is viewed as charged with a powerful force which, if not kept within bounds, may prove destructive both to herself and all that she comes into contact with. To repress this force with the limits necessary for the safety of all concerned is the object of the taboos in question. Same explanation applies to the observance of the same rules by divine kings and priests. The uncleanliness, as it is called, the uncleanness of girls at puberty and the sanctity of holy men do not, to the primitive mind, differ materially from each other. They are only different manifestations of the same mysterious energy, which, like energy in general, is in itself neither good nor bad, but becomes beneficent or maleficent according to its application. Accordingly, if, like girls at puberty, divine personages may neither touch the ground nor see the sun, the result, or the reason is, on one hand, a fear lest their divinity might, on contact with earth or heaven, discharge itself with fatal violence on either, and, on the other hand, an apprehension of the divine being, thus drained of his ethereal virtue, might thereby be incapacitated for the future performance of those magical functions, upon the proper discharge of which the safety of the people and even the world is believed to hang. Thus, the rules in question fall under the head of the taboos which we examined at an earlier part of this book. They are intended to preserve the life of the divine person, and with it, the life of the subjects and worshippers. Nowhere, it is thought, could this precious yet dangerous life be at once so safe and so harmless as when it is neither in heaven nor in earth, but as far as possible, suspended between the two. That's all I really need to read about that. Golden bow time. As I was saying, I think it is both public and yet private, because the concerns of two people should now presumably coincide in union. Why should any state, religious or otherwise, interfere with what happens between partners after the ceremonial or official customs have been observed? Some people will be family members, some will be friends and associates. Most people, it is not their concern at all. It is just so happens that I noticed recently, again, how the Church of England puts it. Anglicans regarded marriage as a domestic commonwealth within England and the church. England meaning the king or the monarchy itself, the head of the church. So therefore, what's true for the king's wealth is true for the wealth of, and they get every lord a castle, or every person, every man a lord of his own peace. Regarded as a domestic commonwealth. The private part is exactly where the property part is considered. And you goddamn well know it is. If I were to go Baptist on it for a second, I'd possibly be capable of conceding that a partnership's election will be proved out by measuring its increase over time. The measure of increase might be in any number of ways. You could say, well, these two persons who have been married, both of them are past their childbearing years, or are capable, or they've been rendered sterile by the environment itself for whatever reason, and yet they have been confirmed elected by God Himself in reality by the increase in their property, the increase in what their property grows. Oh, look at all the food their fields make. Look at all the sheep they raise. It never needs have offspring, not children. It only ever needs show regular returns on the land it works. This is also procreative. Pretending that it starts and ends with human offspring is fallacious. So why do monarchies go to the craziest of all about this particular property distinction, heir apparent? It's not only monarchies, right? So bold and go, and the Christian section. I think that covers everything, Nun. Huh. What am I at here? I'm over an hour, that's for damn sure. It's only measured an hour. I dropped a few frames too this last hour. I do believe I'm going to be taking a break. It's 2 hours straight without stopping. Pretty good, huh? Pretty good. I'll get some music. Yeah. Dang. Surprised I actually got through all that in less than 3 hours. Primary stream. As like a couple hours ago. Yeah, someone doesn't like hearing about the stuff that I have to say, huh? A few bumpity bumps along the way. What does the Bible say about being or using a surrogate mother? Using a surrogate mother to bear children is, for a childless couple, is as old as the story of Abraham and Sarah in Genesis chapter 16. Sarah could not bear children, so she gave her servant Hagar to Abraham so she could have his children. This was a common practice at the time, since a childless woman was shamed by her friends and family. Gotquestions.org. Shadows from the fifth dimension, projecting a 5-dimensional arrangement on a 2-dimensional plane. That's the outcome. Penrose tiling appears to be chaotic, except it's got all these patterns in it. The way you color them is arbitrary, is the point. Projecting a 5-dimensional set of lattice points onto a 2D plane. I dig, man, I dig. If you like the blog, leave a tip. That's a real good idea. Dig this little one. Dig it. Dig it, dig it, dig it. Bookmarked it right away. I was like, whoa, man. Whoa. Penrose. What was I thinking about there a moment ago? I took the time today to do some work. Some proper work on YouTube. I'm going to show you the work that I did. This is the last bit of work I did. I made sure that of the last 2 hours of my stream yesterday, I provided at least one comment, which is going to be basically be able to summarize what I was really trying to say. This 2-hour block is the best 2-hour block of yesterday's stream. Refers quickly to the last part of the stream right here. Previously on the Banjocast, perceived coincidence and synchronicity. I was quite happy with that part, and then the rest of the stream kind of follows from it. This thing is what I'm really looking for. That's my published comments, like on my own content, as it were. I've also got other comments, and in the stream yesterday, one of the things that I did was to reply. Oh wow, they keep changing this. Kept replying to comment thread here, which was on a Hard Bastard video. I'm gonna go right straight to the video. I'll read the thread out to you. Strangely, some of the same themes and that I could have been having in. Mean to say, I really could have been having the same discussion with her as I've been having with Nun. I'm not really opposed to either one of you, Nun or Ann. I'm not. Merely say I'm having a discussion and I'm forced to play a form of advocate. Whatever you call it, devilish or not, is up yourself. I prefer you didn't. 20, 30, having these dinners where we're simulating eating people. I noticed that in the Golden Bough again today. There's a bunch of that happening around the world for centuries, millennia. HB, you gotta call bullshit. Why? Because Holy Communion, or why does Holy Communion get a pass? And said, to be fair, HB was also talking about spirit cooking. Hey Ann, how do you know what that really means? Are you guessing as to what it must mean? Because I'm not on the inside of this cult, I don't presume to know what the cryptic words mean. HB's way of describing spirit cooking was to sum it up in the way I quoted above. This isn't defense of spirit cooking, it's in opposition to fantasy and double standards. Anne says, Jay as well, considering the book contains the words spirit cooking in the title, spirit cooking is essential aphrodisiac recipes by the woman herself, Miss Abramovic. I have to go by her definition of seen in recipes which contain semen, breast milk, blood, menstrual no less, and urine, so no, I don't have to guess. I thumbed it up. Funny, what I heard HB say is there are two ideas he was talking about. Spirit cooking and the second, eating cake in the shape of a naked woman. Neither of which are fantasy in that they're not true. Don't worry, HB dislikes religion for HB dislikes religion for what I've heard him say. I agree. So, nope to the double standards argument either. Reese is somebody. I thumbed that up. And you answered what I asked. That's all I could expect. The fantasy elements of all this, by the way, which we've made exceptionally clear, is that there's something supposedly spiritual about bodily fluids. I say bullshit to that. So, point I raised above still stands. Why does Holy Communion get a pass? Because it contains no real blood? The fact is, there's definitely a book, or definitely an author, or definitely a cultural practice might be true, doesn't mean that mythology or sophistry behind it is true. Precisely because there is no way for anyone on the outside to know what the cryptic meaning is what makes the behavior cult-like. Precisely because there is no way for anyone on the outside to know what the cryptic meaning is, makes the behavior cult-like. So why do cult members your cult and point the most? See also, cultural rituals involving a hunter drinking the blood from a kill. No problem there? I don't know what you're asking me about cults. I don't partake in spirit cooking, Suzanne. I think it's disgusting, nor do I partake in Holy Communion. I never spoke of the supposed meaning behind the spirit cooking, only the term meant as compared to separate practices of Hollywood elites eating naked body cakes. Have a great day. I said, you provided the evidence that HB didn't. I thank you for that, but your argument isn't his argument either. I'm saying cult because it's quite clear from the language involved that there are cryptic meanings to things like spirit cooking, indicating there's a culture of insiders and a culture of outsiders. Or maybe it's the same culture. How does a comedy roast any different, which is something I said at the top, any different from eating a human-shaped cake? What does it matter, the shape of the cake? When I understand wholeheartedly and with my stomach why you or anyone else would find it disgusting. It isn't the issue. The issue is, what is the connection between spiritual and fluid? Because that seems exactly the type of religious bullshit that allows all sorts of crazy behavior so long as it's insiders doing it. I don't personally care, Suzanne. what the shape of the cakes are that they eat. I just find it ironic the virtual signalers are making a big deal out of eating the vaginal and breast areas of the cake first in their art magazine articles. Fair point. I do agree with you on the idea of insiders versus outsiders determining who gets to be part of the cult. Since I'm not part of their cult, either one for that matter, can't begin to explain the meaning of what they do, or of what they do to anyone else. Not really. Strangely, the connection between bodily fluids in the whole discussion is pretty profound connection. Hey, I gotta make sure I got a copy of this. Yeah, I do. I can close this down too now. So I'm going to follow Nun's lead on this one. I think I will actually try to do something involving I don't need to see the camera. Okay. This is a whiteboard layer underneath. What I'm thinking on doing is to work with the image of that that I just had loaded there. This needs to be done here. Background images. Open. I gotta look that up again. Best way of doing it is this. Save images as, pictures fun. Around that. Know more or less where center is on this, so you can see that it isn't quite centered, nor is it quite rotated right. But then again, I remember they spent special time making sure that was counter-rotated a little. They're real picky about their pentagonal placement. What I'm thinking on doing here is to not copy any of the text, only copy the form, and put it in a bunch of different layers, just as a test of concept. So this is Q map Disco. Currently set in the back, yep, 50% will do, or lower. Don't need to read any of the text, only need to see where the forms and the boxes are. Could easily copy this too. Circle. Circle with 5 vertices would be called a pentagon, I believe. Rotate 180. I use 23 on the circles. Duplicate. I was thinking about this earlier too. I'm doing this not really the right way. I got a use for the pieces I'm drawing here, but I got a better plan for how to do this. That one even needs to change, so. Curve. Ooh. Maybe I'll do this with grease pencil, it would be better. If I do it with grease pencil, I totally do get a chance to make it sketch better. Well, yeah. Simple way of doing this. Add curve, just a Bezier. You can grab that and put that anywhere. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one corner there, one corner there. Select them both, switch them to vector. Selecting the second one now, I'm going to click, holding control, left click. And toggle cyclic should link them, yeah? Good. And that will also allow me to draw, like, use it for tracing a form. I can animate a tracing around this. Rotated that 180 degrees here. Put this on the junction point and this on the junction point. Select them both, switch them over to vector. Necessary that this one not be a closed form. So now I have to select all of these and I'm going to box select them. And I'm going to set them via the V key to aligned. That didn't really work. Try automatic. Automatic worked really well actually, considering. That isn't terrible. I only need this one for now. This one I'm going to set to free handled so that I can straighten this line. And fix this one. So right now what would happen if I animated this is it would draw from here and then finish the circle this way, and then I'll do the next one that way. I got a good mind to do it. I like the idea of tracing this line around that way. And in case you don't understand why I did this the way I did it just then, the reason is I fully intend to cut down on the amount of work I'm going to have to do later. Which means if I can copy anything, I'm going to. Like such. I have to admit, I was not disappointed today or yesterday. I wasn't disappointed or shocked or anything like that over Faith Goldie. But I truly do hope or wish her well. If only I could believe it wasn't another form of stunt. Guess that remains to be seen, is kind of what I'm saying. In this case, I think this one's going to go here. So here's the beginning of it. Prior to the other groups being added. Oh, I don't like this. This placement is totally off. Oh, it needs room to put the things over there. Oh, I get it. So room for the boxes on this side and there. Starts at the top and works its way down over here, and then the groups on top. QMap Disco. Yeah, I didn't get the set list for this one. I gotta guess what I'm playing. Not cool. I got hit with a content strike the other night too. Totally try to avoid it. Okay, I like going 3 onwards. 3, 4, 5, 6 looks good. Simplest way to do this would be to draw this way. It's got a definite Jethro Tull feel to it. Only word for it. Haha! Tell you what I like to do now. Oh, it's 12 o'clock. Day is coming. Okay, I gotta get something to eat is what I gotta do, so I can concentrate. So, first 2 hours and a bit down. I'll be back after 12, 1 o'clock, so we'll see. What time is it? It'll be 5's day when I return, but it's not very long. Thanks for listening, YouTube. My name is jamespfp. You got any comments, got any queries? Leave them below. We can talk. Thanks for watching.